Good evening from New York. I'm Ali Velshi in for Chris Hayes. Donald Trump always promises the best deals, but a day after he backed down from his threat to kill, quote, a whole civilization, end quote, his words, everyone's waking up to the fact that his ceasefire with Iran was smoke and mirrors, that the President of the United States crossed a dark line that cannot be uncrossed, all for a shaky promise of a temporary peace that began falling apart less than 24 hours later, and a humiliating list of concessions that Iran says Trump promised them. It's starting to look like Trump was desperate for a way out of a war that he launched almost 6 weeks ago without good reason, a way to wrap it up, to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and declare mission accomplished. That's what the White House tried to do this afternoon.
Thanks to the unmatched excellence of our warriors at the direction of the Commander-in-Chief, the world has just witnessed a historically swift and successful military triumph. President Trump started Operation Epic Fury with strategic military objectives, and the United States has clearly achieved them. It was a very, very strong threat from the President of the United States that led the Iranian regime to cave to their knees and ask for a ceasefire and agree to reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
But by that time, Trump's alleged deal with Iran, which ostensibly is a 2-week ceasefire to negotiate peace, was already falling apart. Now, according to the Pakistani officials who brokered the ceasefire agreement between Trump and Iran, the deal covers Lebanon, too, which has been under constant bombardment by Israel. Multiple Iranian officials said the same thing, and they publicly warned that they would respond if Israel didn't stop the bombing in Lebanon. But today, Israel didn't just continue bombing Lebanon. It launched the deadliest attacks there since the war began, 100 airstrikes in 10 minutes, according to the New York Times. At least 182 people were killed and hundreds were wounded today alone, according to the AP. Today, the White House saw that fire raging and poured gasoline on it.
Would President Trump like to see Lebanon included in this peace deal? Because as you know, there's been increased Israeli strikes on Lebanon today with dozens of casualties there.
Sure. Lebanon is not part of the ceasefire. That has been relayed to all parties involved in the ceasefire.
So after the U.S. said that their idea of a peace deal doesn't extend to stopping Israel's bombs that are going into Lebanon, Iranian state media reported that the government there had resumed blocking traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, once again cutting off 20% of the world's oil and gas supply. As a reminder, that's something they were not doing before Donald Trump started the war. The Strait of Hormuz was open and operating properly 6 weeks ago, something Trump said had to stop before he would end the war. But once again, the White House was caught flat-footed.
Well, with respect to the first reporting out of Iranian state media, the president was made aware of those reports before I came to the podium. That is completely unacceptable. And again, this is a case of what they're saying publicly is different privately. We have seen an uptick of traffic in the Strait today.
We've seen an uptick in traffic in the Strait of Hormuz today. Let's talk about that for a second. Before Iran closed the Strait again today, 3 ships were observed leaving the region on Wednesday, according to ship tracking data that's compiled by Bloomberg. That is 3 ships out of an estimated 800 tanker ships awaiting safe passage. And by the time the White House spokesperson, Carolyn Levitt, left that podium, Iranian officials said the U.S. had violated the ceasefire agreement and that peace negotiations would not continue. For its part, the White House says peace talks are ongoing, and J.D. Vance is slated to join negotiations in Pakistan this weekend. This is where Donald Trump's threat of genocidal violence has led us. He discussed destroying an entire population, an entire civilization, as he called it yesterday, on behalf of the American people, using American taxpayer dollars. In doing that, he crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Whether or not that was a negotiating tactic, it didn't work anyway. This wasn't just talk about defeating an opposing military or changing a regime. Trump went 19 steps further. He went to a place where dictators go, a place beyond saneness and humanity. It's the stuff of horrible, megalomaniacal, authoritarian behavior throughout history. The Geneva Conventions and the U.S. military's own law of war spell out how the President of the United States was talking about committing war crimes in public. In fact, they spell out that merely making the threat itself is a war crime. But Trump is flouting those laws like he flouts all other laws, making a mockery of American ideals and values and laws, creating a permission structure for unbridled brutality. If you thought January 6th was a real problem, if you thought the deadly Capitol insurrection was a serious attack on American values and on who we are as a people, Donald Trump's threat to kill a whole civilization is just as dangerous, if not worse. Ben Rhodes served as a deputy national security advisor for President Obama. He now hosts the Crooked Media's Pod Save the World. He joins me now. Ben, this is, I think it's hard to impress on people that ceasefire or no ceasefire, and we can discuss whether or not this is real. What Donald Trump did yesterday is unheard of in the annals of American history.
No, I mean, there's nothing in modern American history anywhere near this. He threatened to commit genocide. He threatened to wipe out a thousands-year-old civilization. He threatened to bomb civilian targets that have nothing to do with any military objectives. He threatened mass murder on an epic scale. And whether he ends up doing it or not, he's already committed a war crime. And this will color the opinion in the United States for a generation around the world. There is no moral high ground anymore. He effectively cast the United States as acting like a rogue nation, led by an autocrat who doesn't value any human life whatsoever. And those are pretty serious words, but that's what he said. I mean,
I can't believe you're saying these words.
It wasn't the first time. Yeah.
I mean, we've all been critical of presidents and different leaders. This is different. This is not critical of. This is completely in a different space. Whether or not you believe that the United States should be the world's policeman or be at the forefront of these discussions is entirely different from what we have now become.
Do you want to know how I know that Donald Trump had a very, very bad day today? Because tonight, just about 24 hours after he announced a ceasefire with Iran, he wasn't posting about his ceasefire with Iran. Nope, he was posting about NATO and Greenland in all caps. And I will tell you, I mean, posts about NATO and Greenland in all caps are kind of a dead giveaway that things are not going well elsewhere. And yes, in what is perhaps the least surprising turn of events, Trump's big 2-week ceasefire deal with Iran is kind of falling apart. And why is it not surprising? It's not surprising to me at all. Because despite all the claims that the U.S. and Iran had come to some sort of a historic ceasefire, as they shouted it from the rooftops last night, it seemed like they never actually agreed on the basic parameters for negotiating the biggest issues. I mean, they never agreed on how the Strait of Hormuz would reopen and whether Iran would continue to control it. They never agreed on whether or not the ceasefire included Lebanon. They never agreed on whether or not Iran having the right to enrich uranium as part of their nuclear program was even on the table. None of that was apparently nailed down before this deal was announced last night. And so today, it all fell apart. Not surprising at all. Iran's Fars news agency reported that the Strait of Hormuz has been reclosed over Israel's continued strikes in Lebanon. Bloomberg reports that just 3 ships actually made it through the strait. Before the war, 135 ships sailed through there every single day, just to give you a sense of the context there. And Iran is reportedly hoping to extract payment from ships for safe passage, a real boon for Iran, something they have already been doing. Throughout the day, Iran continued to fire missiles at our Gulf allies in the region. And by this afternoon, the Speaker of Iran's parliament had accused the United States of violating the agreement altogether, saying, quote, "In such a situation, a bilateral ceasefire or negotiations is unreasonable." So, everyone, less than 24 hours later, other than that, everything seems to be going great. Now, on the question of what Donald Trump has actually achieved in this war of choice that he is now desperately and unsuccessfully trying to unwind, well, all Trump needed to do, and I bet he was doing this, we know his TV habits, was turn on his favorite Fox Morning show today to know that he has achieved basically nothing.
The president demands we have not reached any of those objectives. I have full confidence that the president is going to find some way to make this happen. But he said that we want to dismantle all major nuclear facilities. That has not happened. The end of of uranium enrichment on the soil, they're still enriching. The transfer of the enriched uranium stockpiles out of Iran, that hasn't happened. The acceptance of intrusive international inspections, they're still not willing to do that. And they have not suspended their ballistic missiles program. They're still firing them off to stop the production of the long-range missiles. That's just a few of them on the president's proposal.
That was on Fox this morning. They had graphics. He prepared what he was going to say there, and it was definitely not a ringing endorsement. So Trump hasn't achieved much of anything, and his deal to end this disastrous war appears to also be in tatters already. But if you just listen to the Trump administration or their allies in that universe of MAGA land, you would think that Trump got everything he wanted and it was just all about to end. Time to roll out the mission accomplished banner. Trump literally told a French news outlet that the deal was a, quote, total and complete victory. And Secretary of Maximum Lethality Pete Hegseth took his own victory lap in a very Pete Hegsethian way.
Iran begged for this ceasefire, and we all know it. Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield. A capital V military victory.
And then he dropped to the ground and did 20 push-ups and kissed his muscles. Not really. I mean, just metaphorically. He thought about it. I think he thought about it. When things aren't going well, all you can do is pound your chest and claim victory with a capital V, as Pete Hegseth just did. Or you can do whatever the hell this is.
Democrats are already saying that this is taco. Trump always chickens out. Let me give you another acronym. Nacho. Never avoids confronting hard obstacles.
Okay. Griff there, that's his name, Griff, was probably so proud of himself when he wrote that down this morning in big block letters and practiced it in the mirror. But the fact is, as the day rolled on, it became harder and harder and harder to deny the reality that this deal was falling apart. That became abundantly clear when reporters caught up with the Trump administration's highest-ranking negotiator by their own definition in these peace talks, Vice President J.D. Vance. Here he was today being asked a very valid question about when the strait would reopen.
Mr. Vice President, Iran is continuing to block the Straits of Hormuz. Do you have an expectation of when that strait is going to be open?
Well, we've already seen an increase in traffic today. Hopefully we'll see an increase in traffic tomorrow. We actually think that we are seeing signs that the Straits is starting to reopen.
Okay. So we've seen an increase in traffic today. That's what the vice president just said. As I mentioned before, Bloomberg reports that just 3 ships were observed leaving the region, at least 2 of which had ties to Iran. Iran is publicly claiming that the strait remains closed. They're continuing, as far as we know, to charge fees to people who want to go through. But J.D. Vance says nothing to worry about. All signs are positive. Then he was asked another perfectly valid question from a reporter about Iran's claim that the U.S. has already violated the agreement.
Tweeted out that 3 of the 10 points in the ceasefire framework have already been violated. They're distrustful of the U.S. What do you make of him tweeting that out before negotiations?
So I thought it was interesting, actually, because I did see that tweet from Ghalibaf actually just a couple of minutes ago. Let me just say this. I actually wonder how good he is at understanding English, because there are things that he said that frankly didn't make sense in the context of the negotiations that we've had.
Okay, so just to unpack that one. The Speaker of Iran's parliament said that the U.S. violated the deal, and J.D. Vance's answer was, well, he just needs to brush up on his English. Maybe it was a translation issue. Again, J.D. Vance is the official who is supposed to sit across from the Iranians in these negotiations in just a few days. Now, if you thought that was a reach, just listen to how J.D. Vance tried to explain away the differences between Iran and the U.S. on the question of nuclear enrichment.
The second thing Ghalibaf said, which, again, I found fascinating, is he said, we refuse to give up the right to enrichment. And I thought to myself, you know what? My wife has the right to skydive, but she doesn't jump out of an airplane because she and I have an agreement that she's not going to do that because I don't want my wife jumping out of an airplane.
I have so many questions. Like, what on earth are you talking about? Also, are you saying that you trust the Iranians won't enrich uranium even if they have access, just like you trust your wife won't jump out of a plane? I still don't think it clears anything up. I don't know where that came from. Now, all of this is even more concerning when you consider that J.D. Vance is supposed to be the one voice in the room who actually opposes the war. But as the New York Times reported last night, Vance is apparently too timid to actually do anything about it, aside from, of course, pitch stories about how he privately opposed the war, which he seems to be doing a lot of. When Trump was weighing whether or not to launch this disastrous war, Vance reportedly told the president, you know, I think this is a bad idea, but if you want to do it, I'll support you. Way to be bold. Use your voice there, J.D. That's the extent, as far as we know, of the pushback Trump has gotten from some of his closest advisors as he continues to make one bad decision after another in this conflict. And it's a stark contrast to the kind of pushback Trump reportedly got during his first administration when contemplating military action in Iran. In his book, Peril, legendary journalist, sitting right across from me right now, Bob Woodward, recounted some of the debates Trump had with his first-term advisors on the subject of striking Iran. And he wrote, quote, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley went back and forth like a tag team, underscoring the reasons not to take any military action. Vice President Pence and Acting Defense Secretary Miller seemed to agree that no military action should be taken. Okay, thanks, Trump said. As Milley once said to an advisor, the whole Iran thing comes and goes and comes and goes and comes and goes. CIA Director Gina Haspel was worried about the lack of a clear decision and called Milley. This is a highly dangerous situation. We're going to lash out for his ego? And later that night, Pompeo called Milley, thanked him for arguing against the strike and emphasizing the downsides. We're all good, Milley said, emphasizing the importance of calm and piling on the metaphors. Just steady, breathe through our noses. Steady as a rock. We're going to land this plane safely. We've got a plane with 4 engines and 3 of them are out. We've got no landing gear, but we're going to land this plane and we're going to land it safely. But this time around, no one is planning to land the plane safely. Everyone in Trump 2.0, or most people, at least that we know about, just seem along for the ride. And now the same people who let Trump get us into this war are bungling their best opportunity to get us out of it.
19 past with the breaking news from Capitol Hill. The House Oversight Committee has announced former Attorney General Pam Bondi will not testify as part of the Epstein probe next week. The committee voted to subpoena her last month. MS Now Capitol Hill reporter Kevin Fry is joining us with more on this. So, Kevin, welcome. What can you tell us about this decision to not have her testify?
Yeah, apparently the DOJ is saying that she will not be testifying because, according to them, she was subpoenaed as in her role as the Attorney General, and she obviously will no longer be serving in that capacity. It is worth noting, though, that the House committee does leave open the door to the possibility of her coming in later, saying that they're going to be talking to her personal counsel about next steps regarding scheduling her deposition. So not closing the door quite yet, though, as one might expect, the Democrats on this committee, that the top Democrat, Robert Garcia, out with a statement just within the last few moments, saying that the subpoena is to Pam Bondi, whether she is Attorney General or not. She must come in to testify immediately, and they are threatening to begin contempt charges in the Congress if she does not indeed show up. And this, of course, comes just like a few hours, actually, after we saw a bipartisan statement from 2 of the most outspoken folks in pushing for greater transparency when it comes to the Epstein files, being Nancy Mace, a Republican, Ro Khanna, a Democrat, leaning on the chairman of this committee, James Comer, telling him that he needs to make clear that Bondi does need to testify. So obviously, next week, next Tuesday is off. But the question remains, will they find a new date in her personal capacity?
Okay. Let me pivot and ask you about, relative to the war with Iran, how lawmakers are reacting to this ceasefire announcement.
Yeah, so notably, Democrats are really continuing to double down on what they were saying in the lead up to last night, especially in light of what we saw within the last few days in terms of the president's rhetoric, particularly his decision yesterday morning to suggest that they would basically wipe out an entire civilization. And so you've seen Democrats like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez say that, look, just because there's this ceasefire deal, this 2-week pause that is in place, that does not erase what we've been saying for the last 24 hours, which is the president is off his rocker, essentially, and needs to be, the 25th Amendment to remove him needs to be invoked. Here's what she said in a statement. This statement changes nothing, the ceasefire agreement. The president has threatened a genocide against the Iranian people and is continuing to leverage that threat. All of these incidents and there are plenty more, have clearly driven our country past the threshold for impeachment or invocation of the 25th Amendment. At the same time, not a lot of commentary coming from Republicans, one notable exception being that of Lindsey Graham, who, of course, is one of the more outspoken proponents of this war from the get-go. He did leave a little degree of kind of cautious curiosity about what the president is actually planning here, in no small part because the president, as part of this announcement yesterday, suggested that this 10-point proposal from the Iranians could serve as a sort of starting point for negotiations. Notably, that proposal includes, as we've been talking about all morning, this idea that Iran could control, for example, the Strait of Hormuz, other things that the Americans will not find acceptable. So Graham saying in his own statement that the supposed negotiating document, in my view, has some troubling aspects, but time will tell. I look forward to the architects of this proposal, the vice president and others, coming to Congress and explaining how a negotiated deal meets our national security objectives in Iran. So while continuing to voice support for the president there, some notable skepticism from one of his most ardent supporters on the Republican side of the aisle on Capitol Hill. Alex.
Okay. Kevin Fry, thank you very much for all of that.
Hi again, everyone. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. You'll have to excuse us if this is starting to sound like the same old story, but in state after state, red district after red district, Democrats are once again on the cutting edge of what appears to be a political sea change in the United States of America. Keep this in mind next time you hear Donald Trump publicly plotting to rig the midterm elections. But first, those results. In solidly purple Wisconsin, which went for Donald Trump a year and a half ago, the contest for that state's Supreme Court resulted in what one former Republican strategist described to Politico as a, quote, wow moment. Although officially a nonpartisan race, the candidate backed by Democrats defeated her counterpart, the one backed by the Republicans, by a whopping 20 points, with winning margins in counties Trump didn't even worry about in 2024. Then 1,000 miles south in Georgia, a different sort of result, but energizing for Republicans all the same. It was a victory for the Republican candidate in a special election to replace Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene. But if you look closer, you'll see that the most propulsive leftward swing in any special election since the start of last year, to the tune of 25 points, also happened there last night. New York Times writes it like this, quote, the shift is a political harbinger for Republicans in this year's midterm elections. Nearly 24 House Republicans won their 2024 races by 10 points or less. The Senate map includes seats in Alaska, Iowa, Ohio, and Texas that could be in play if the Democratic advantage proves to be durable through November. Georgia Democrats also saw the outcome as a boost for Senator Jon Ossoff, who is seeking re-election this fall. But wait, there's more. Just yesterday, the Cook Political Report, one of, if not the most respected weather vanes for these sorts of analyses, shifted 5 House races in the direction of Democrats compared to just one that moved the other way. The context of that decision isn't exactly a closely held secret. Poll after poll after poll after poll has shown that people are upset about all sorts of things, chief among them gas prices, the cost of living, wars they did not ask for. In fact, wars they specifically voted against when they chose Trump. So again, for all the time and money and effort that goes into politics, as complicated as the consultants want to make it seem, in the end, it comes down to what people feel and what they want. And right now, their gut appears to be telling them it is time for something other than Trump. That is where we begin the hour. Political analyst, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller's here. Also joining us, former senior advisor to President Biden and Vice President Harris, the former mayor of New Orleans. Mitch Landrieu's back. He's now the co-chair of the American Bridge 21st Century, plus Democratic strategist and Columbia University professor, political analyst. Our friend Basil Smigels here as well. Mitch, I start with you. Your thoughts on last night? Can you hear us?
Yeah.
What do you think about last night?
Well, I think that it's evidence again that the American people think that Donald Trump is losing his focus and may very well have lost his mind. They wanted him to do a couple of things when he got elected, which was to stay out of foreign wars and to reduce costs. And what he's decided to do is threaten to blow up an entire civilization and stop focusing on rising costs. So in other words, he's focused on bombs and ballrooms and not on helping people with their gas prices, their homes, and their day-to-day living. And they have demonstrated time and time again for the last year now in almost every election that's been held in the country that they think the country is going in the wrong direction. And that is a trend. It wasn't just a little boomlet last night. It's similar to exactly what has happened in the last 200 or so races in the last 9 months.
Mitch, what do you think is propelling the size of the margins? I mean, this isn't just, I thought things would get cheaper, they got more expensive, so I'm pissed. This is like vomiting up whatever they once guzzled in about Donald Trump and Trumpism.
Well, I think that there are two things happening at once, and they're equally important and impactful. One is every day Donald Trump seems more out of control. So he doesn't run a good government. He can't run a good war. He makes bad decisions. He's focused on the wrong stuff. The level of corruption is intense. And I think last night, America's got to stop on this moment. Our president, the president that we gave power to, basically said that he was going to use the power that we gave him to destroy a civilization that's 6,000 years old, that has 98 million people in it. People have to stop on that. Presidents can't say stuff like that and then just act like they did not say it. That has a destabilizing impact on the world. And I think that even a little kid can feel like, you know what, that feels really, really, really bad. And I think Americans are really tired of how bombastic he's been, how chaotic he's been with tariffs. He doesn't seem to know what page he's on from day to day, and people feel that instability. Simultaneously therewith, that instability and that chaos is actually causing the thing that they hated the most, which is how much it costs to live and just to make ends meet, where these people don't have time to think about that because they can't make their paycheck, and they're pissed now, and they're tired, and they are very fluid voters and are basically saying, you know what, I got to try something different, or at least got to stop what's happening today.
Tim Miller, how do you see the moment?
Look, I see it as a huge opportunity for the Democrats. And let's just nerd out a little bit for a second on last night, right? Because I think that the numbers are pretty important here. And the key number that I've been looking at as you talk to the midterms is 14 points, a 14-point swing. And here's why. There are 4 states that Trump won by 13 points, give or take. It's Texas, it's Alaska, it's Iowa, and it's a state people don't talk about that much anymore, Florida. Okay, all 4 of those is a 13-point win for Donald Trump. All 4 of those have Senate seats up this year. Do all 4 of them have governor seats? At least 3 of them have governor seats up this year.
Yeah.
And so huge races. And if the Democrats are going to take back the Senate and not just tie it, like they need to win at least one of those. If they want to really have a Senate majority to work with, you know, they could go and sweep them. And so, you know, we've talked a lot about the Texas Senate race and the Iowa Senate race. Democrats have good candidates there. Rob Sands going to run for governor. There's a Senate primary going on. In Florida, you know, we got our guys, David Jolly and Alex Vindman, who you both had on this show, running in the governor and Senate races respectively. So they're legit candidates that could win in those states. And so if you look at these swings right now, you're seeing, I mean, in that Georgia race last night, much more than that. But in a lot of these places, right around there, 13, 14, 15-point swings. Now, a midterm election is different than a special election. Special election, people kind of know that the election's happening that day. So there's this extra burden to getting there, right? So it advantages the side that's more enthusiastic because they're paying attention to the news. So the Democrats, I think, have more work to do from April to November. Luckily, Donald Trump's doing a lot of the work for them by the way that he's alienating people and, you know, by the wreckage he's causing the economy and by the way that he's out of touch with people's interests. But, you know, I think that had we talked 3 months ago, you know, I think people would have laughed you out of the room by even bringing up Florida and Iowa. And now I think that Alaska, Iowa, Florida, Texas are all real states that are in play for the Democrats and very important states. And besides Alaska, they've all been states, well, I guess Texas, at least in the case of Iowa and Florida, they were states that Democrats won not that long ago.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, I also feel like everyone, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or former Republican, everyone has sort of swallowed the asymmetry, right? And like the Republicans picked a felon and they're doing all this stuff that they lied about, and we just put them as other. And the Democrats get sort of fly-specked because they are holding all the hopes of the country remaining a democracy. So in the spirit of, you know, we point out when they do things wrong, I want to point out what I think they're doing right, which is that they are now the tent with Mamdani and Tallarico in it. with AOC and David Jolly in it. They now represent the party that represents like 70% of the mainstream views of the country from sort of here to here. And there are still issues, and I know you're sort of picking at those scabs and doing the Lord's work there. But in terms of a brand, I think the Democratic Party has done a lot to be in a very healthy position ahead of November on that front.
Yeah, look, I agree with that. And I also think if we're going to give the Democratic Party some flowers here, they've won both shutdowns in Capitol Hill. There's a lot of complaints about the Democratic Party leaders in Washington, but in both cases, in the first one, they, I think, raised the salience of the healthcare issue and how Donald Trump's not following through on his America First promises when he talks about getting healthcare to people that need it, particularly in rural communities. And then in this one on DHS, I think you see Donald Trump having to fold, kind of like he's having to fold in the Iran negotiations. So I think you have seen that from Democrats. A lot of times, when you're saying, when you're talking about the ways that the Democrats aren't, what you would have called they're picking at the scab. A lot of my message for the Democrats is kind of the opposite right now, which is like, yeah, this is the party of everybody from AOC to David Jolly, to just pick two examples out of the air. But they need to also take as much advantage as possible of all the opportunities that Donald Trump is giving them right now. And like, right. Donald Trump is alienating demographic after demographic of people that voted for him. And whether they thought he was the anti-war candidate or thought he was the lowering prices candidate, he screwed it up. And so a lot of times, maybe I would use, instead of picking the scab, I would say cajoling the Democrats to get out there and scoop up all those voters as much as possible right now in this moment.
It's a compliment, because I think there's an introspection that becomes message when it should be tactic. And so I respect what you're doing.
Joining me now, Adil Haq, law professor at Rutgers Law School. With me here on set, Michael Weiss, editor of The Insider and co-author of ISIS, Inside the Army of Terror. So there we have it, Michael, and have had it through today, both sides declaring victory in a war that we don't even know if it's over. But can both sides be right?
Well, we don't even know what the terms are of the ceasefire, right? I mean, Donald Trump has now taken to Truth Social denouncing a CNN report which cited Iranian officials with 10 points of their own, saying this is all fake news and there's a federal investigation into who's leaking this and whatnot. For the last 5 hours or so, it's been a question, is Lebanon on the table in terms of a ceasefire? The Israelis said, nope, it's not. The Americans said, nope, it's not. But the Iranians seem to think it is and are threatening that, if the Israelis don't stop pounding Hezbollah, they might continue hostilities themselves. So I'm as confused as I think everyone else is, to be honest. I know you're not supposed to say that on TV, but, I really don't have any sense of clarity. Trump says that there is a term sheet that everyone has agreed to, and that's what's going to be negotiated. And, oh, by the way, J.D. Vance is not going to be the one to do it in Islamabad because of security reasons. So it's going to be the, dynamic duo of Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. So
are they saying that they're
expendable, but J.D. isn't? They can go to Pakistan, but he can't. And remember, those guys didn't do such a bang-up job with the diplomacy going into this thing. And I don't think the Iranians are going to treat them with anything other than the utmost contempt, right? The juju before the ceasefire was announced was that actually J.D. had volunteered himself to be the interlocutor because the Iranians see him as the isolationist who is anti-war and the guy that they can make a deal with. But Kushner and Witkoff, I don't know. I mean,
Adil, do you have a sense of what's included in this ceasefire and what's not?
No, I think it's pretty clear that there has been miscommunication or lack of clarity. And to be honest, that's not surprising when you try to negotiate a very complex arrangement on a very short timeline. And the negotiators are afraid to even show their faces because they might be assassinated. So this is not how diplomacy is supposed to work. And we see the result is an agreement whose contours are very uncertain and which might collapse at any moment because of that uncertainty.
And yet that has not stopped, Michael, this administration from declaring victory. Let me play a little bit of what Pete Hegseth had to say this morning.
Well, it's always been non-negotiable that they won't have nuclear capabilities. And so right now it's buried and we're watching it. We know exactly what they have, and they know that. And they will either give it to us, which the president has laid out. They'll give it to us voluntarily. We'll get it. We'll take it. We'll take it out.
So I just want to remind people that under the Obama-era negotiated nuclear deal, Iran agreed to relinquish 97% of its enriched uranium stockpiles, 70% of its centrifuges. So we've declared victory. Are we, as the United States, in a better position now than we were after the approval of that deal under Obama?
Part of the JCPOA, you'll recall, a lot of critics were saying, well, we're delivering pallets of cash to the Iranians, when we lifted or unfroze sanctions. Now the Iranians are saying, and again, we don't know if this is true or if this is going to be certified by any kind of bilateral agreement, but the Iranians are saying, actually, we're going to charge a levy for each tanker that we allow to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, the Iranians control the strait. That was not on the bingo card before this war started, right? The amount of money that they could potentially make just with that blockage of tankers that are held up there is something like $64 billion. Now, my question is, what are they going to do with that money? Are they going to maybe start rebuilding their missile capability? Are they going to use this to finance their proxies and project power? All of the military objectives that General Kane had laid out at the start of this war for the United States to achieve could very easily be undone simply by an economic windfall that we might accede to here.
Well, maybe a deal, because the president has suggested this. It's going to be some sort of joint venture of collecting money along the Strait of Hormuz between what were apparently, just 12 hours or so ago, enemies, the United States and Iran. What do you make of that?
So there's no legal basis for charging tolls to transit through the Strait of Hormuz. So the United States and Iran can agree to what they want, but there's no legal basis for it. So I can't expect the international community to accept it and go along with it. So it's essentially an attempt to monetize and to negotiate around international law, and I don't think it's going to succeed.
What are you going to be watching for, Michael, in the days to come, both from this administration and from Iran? Because, again, you have both sides declaring victory, and Iran shows no signs of being cowed.
No. And if you talk to the Gulf states, they see no ceasefire in place, 12 hours or 20 hours later. I mean, the UAE, the Saudis have been pounded. Now, the question is this because of the lack of command and control? So, in other words, the IRGC is launching drones and missiles because they haven't gotten the memo that there's a ceasefire in place? Or is it that Iran now knows Donald Trump is desperate to call this whole thing off and, in fact, engage economically in a joint business venture with the IRGC such that they can humiliate and pound the UAE and the Saudis and the GCC countries with impunity, knowing that the United States will not retaliate? You heard Pete Hegseth today was talking about this war in the past tense. So all the optics from our side is it's all over but the shouting here, right? And the Iranians, I think, are going to take that. Whether or not it's an actual victory for them and that they have won this thing, they certainly believe that they have.
I want to go back into region with Associated Press's Isabel Debray from Beirut. So what can you tell us about this? And let me start with Israel saying this ceasefire doesn't apply to Lebanon. What can you tell us about what we know about what's happening on the ground?
There indeed were no signs of a ceasefire today in Beirut. Actually, it was the most intense day of the war since it started on March 2nd. And that's the war, of course, between Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Hezbollah has held fire. We have seen that. But the Israeli military has announced a series of intense strikes over the last hours. And in Beirut, it was just scenes of chaos, honestly. We were walking through the streets and there were just piles of cars that had burned. There were just entire apartment blocks that had been razed to the ground by these strikes. There's twisted metal everywhere, ambulances that were trying to make it through rush hour. Hospitals were calling on people to donate blood. The Lebanese health ministry is still counting the casualties, but really this does seem like one of the deadliest days of the war so far. Just in Beirut, over 80 people killed and over 700 wounded. So that death toll is likely to rise, we're told. And again, just really scenes that were sort of surreal as everyone in the region was talking about this ceasefire, just seeing this destruction in Beirut. And also important to mention that we're not just talking about areas on the outskirts of Beirut that have already been evacuated, that Israel has repeatedly warned people to leave. These are areas really in central Beirut, densely packed commercial residential areas that have previously been spared from a lot of that violence. So really shocking to be here on that day.
Thank you so much for that, Isabel Debray. So, Adil, let me close up with this question, which is obviously in the Middle East, the violence continues. But the justification for this, or one of the justifications, was to get rid of nuclear capabilities, to make the United States of America safer, that this was a matter of national security. today, is the U.S. safer than it was when this war began?
No, I think that it's pretty clear that there was a negotiated settlement to be had with Iran. It's not clear whether the deals are going to be more favorable after this extremely bloody and destructive war. So it does seem that we've killed around 1,700 civilians and achieved nothing and not really improved our national security in any way. We've created more enemies, more instability, damaged our economy and the economy of the region, and really have nothing to show for it. And again, the conflict is not necessarily over. We have to wait and see if the bloodshed will finally end.
Because his support structures were unusually durable. Michael, you go on to write, a loyal army of followers, a huge disinformation network, and a party of soul-selling cowards can crowd out facts for a long time. But eventually, reality catches up. It's finally happening. I'd say we should celebrate. But there now arises a question of how he'll react as reality closes in on him. I fear we haven't begun to see the worst. And Michael, to that point, I know people in Trump's orbit who are Trump supporters who sort of nervously have looked at themselves in recent weeks amid this war in Iran, war of choice, and look ahead to this year's midterms, and particularly if Republicans, as forecasted, lose at least one House, that the president in his final 2 years will be with no chance of getting anything passed, will simply be in full-on legacy mode, trying to leave his mark on history with zero guardrails in place.
Yeah, it's really concerning, and that's why I decided to end the column on that rather dour note, but I think it's something that we all should be thinking about right now. You know, usually Trump is in the mid to high 30s in the polls, and he's been sinking and sinking. And the polls have just been getting worse in the last few weeks, and I think particularly because of Iran and the support he's shedding from past backers over Iran, they're going to get worse. Now, what's he going to do? How's he going to respond? You know, usually when presidents get down into the 30s, they do something about it. They change course. Barack Obama, I'm not sure he ever got into the 30s, but after the 2010 midterms, when the Democrats got shellacked, his word, he did pivot. He pivoted toward the center. He pivoted away from public investment and toward deficit reduction. George W. Bush, when he went down in the polls, I'm not sure he pivoted as emphatically toward the center, but he dropped some of his more right-wing initiatives, most notably in 2006, his attempt to privatize Social Security. He saw that that was very unpopular, and he dropped it. Donald Trump, I don't think, it's an understatement to say, is capable of any kind of pivot. Donald Trump is just going to double down. One piece of evidence we've seen here is that he demands of Pam Bondi's replacement at the Justice Department that that person be even more aggressive in pursuing these unethical and probably illegal investigations of his political opponents. So if he's a cornered animal in the last 2 years, you're absolutely right. We need to look out.
Michael, what do you think Donald Trump is prepared to do and those around him are prepared to do leading up to these midterms? This is a president who has cast aspersions on elections before and interfered mightily. And so now that he's in an even weaker position politically, you know, that's a concern of mine. What specifically do you think he might be prepared to do? Are you hearing anything about preparations on that front? And what should the rest of us do to prevent that from happening?
Yeah, that last question is a good one. I'm not sure I have a good answer to that one, Mara. But, well, we can look at what they've done. They passed this Save America Act, under which the Trump administration can make a lot of moves to try and block voting, suppress voting when Election Day comes around. They could put ICE agents at polling places, which has been discussed. Also, less discussed lately, but let's never forget, the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act is so vague and so amorphous that it enables a president to do practically anything. I mean, a president can, in theory, deputize something like the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys to be his literal private army to go and look at polling places. Would Trump go that far? I'm not sure he would go that far. We have seen evidence that public opinion does matter sometimes, occasionally, to this White House. And if it looks like something is going to be really unpopular or has become really unpopular, they'll pull back. They did that in Minneapolis. So there is evidence that public opinion still matters in this country. But I'm nervous, and I think a lot of experts like Mark Elias and people like that are really nervous about what they have hatched for Election Day that the rest of us can't even contemplate.
The important new piece available to read online now. Editor at The New Republic, Michael Tomasky. Michael, thank you as always.